Hello and welcome to the Low Carb Conversations podcast. I am your host, Holly Jean, and I am joined today with my co-host, Leah Williamson. Hi, Leah.
Hi, Holly.
Hi, and we have Ben Azadi on the show today. Hi, Ben.
Hey, you too. Great to be here.
Hi, Ben.
Yes, so great to have you. So Ben is a longtime keto advocate. He is an educator. He has his own podcast, a popular YouTube channel. He is also the author of a few best-selling books. He has the Perfect Health Booklet, the Intermittent Fasting Cheat Sheet. He has a book called The Power of Sleep, and his latest book is called Keto Flex, 4 Secrets to Reduce Inflammation, Burn Fat, and Reboot Your Metabolism. So, Ben, I already said welcome. So why don't we start off just doing like a little background of yourself, your story for our audience, and then what was your inspiration for this latest book?
Yeah, well, thank you for the invitation. I'm grateful to be here. I got into the health space back in 2008 when I went through my own personal transformation. I was 24 years old at that time. I weighed 250 pounds. I was physically obese, also mentally obese with very toxic, depressive, suicidal thoughts. And I was in a rock bottom place in my life. Didn't really understand health or study it or exercise or anything of that nature. And I had really bad addictions at that time to video games and sugar, food addictions. And I knew my life was just headed down a destructive path. I felt it, I looked it, and it was just a very unhealthy time of my life. So being in rock bottom actually helped me wake up. And I was introduced to reading books for the first time ever without being forced to in school. I started to read books from amazing authors, Dr. Wayne Dyer, Bob Proctor, Earl Nightingale, and other incredible authors who wrote these books. And I started to read the books during this difficult time. And what the books did for me, the most important thing that the books did for me, they helped me take ownership and responsibility over my results and my circumstances. Up until that point, I was playing the victim card. I was blaming my enabling family members. I was blaming my genetics, my slow metabolism, etc. But the books actually helped me take responsibility. And that word responsibility, I believe, is so important. What that word means, it's your ability to respond to life. Up until that point, my ability to respond to life was really poor. I was playing the victim of my history. I no longer did that. I started to become the victor of my destiny, and I started to actually eat better. I started to exercise. I started to take that ownership. And 9 months from that responsibility moment, I went from 250 pounds down to 170 pounds. I went from 34% body fat to 6% body fat. I used to wear size 38 jeans in the waist size. I went down to size 30. So finally carved out a physical six pack. But the most important thing that I achieved during that transformation was a mental six pack. I started to think better thoughts. I started to really understand how thoughts could impact our health, both positively or negatively. And that's what got me started in the health space. I became a personal trainer, certified health coach. I opened up a CrossFit gym, sold a CrossFit gym, and I've been a student ever since. Really just want to absorb all the information we have out there. And our mission here at Keto Kamp, my company, is to educate and to inspire 1 billion people, to help them understand that their body is capable of healing. They are a magnificent creation, and we have tools available to us, these ancient healing strategies like ketosis and fasting, that could actually help this innate intelligence do its job. So I've been teaching keto since I discovered that in 2014, and I've learned a lot along the way, which has brought us to the new book, Keto Flex, which I compile all what I've learned into a few chapters in a book that the reader could read and understand how to apply it, how to flex in and out, how to utilize fasting, and also Carnivore and other tools we have available to us so they could do this tool and apply it and get the amazing results that it should give you.
I love that. I really like that part where you said you took responsibility for your own health and to be able to take yourself from a place where you're in just such like mental despair to becoming responsible for what you're eating, how you're moving your body, how you're living. Like that's kind of hard to do on your own. So that's great that you were able to muster up that like inner strength to do it, because you're so right. Anything when it comes to getting healthy or losing weight, like it is 99% mental, I think, for sure.
Yeah, Holly, absolutely. And a lot of people don't get that. They don't understand that the thoughts that we think determine inflammation in our body, essentially. And if we could think better thoughts, we could actually reduce inflammation. But if we think toxic, hateful thoughts, it's going to be very difficult to heal, even on a low carb diet. It's going to be very, very difficult.
Yes, where the mind goes, the body follows.
That's right.
So your new book, I love it, Keto Flex. It's all about getting healthy. It's not just about the keto diet. It's not just about weight loss. It's really a holistic book about healing your body and bringing your body back into balance, and how once you do those things, then weight loss is a byproduct. But it's like you mentioned, um, you don't lose weight and then get healthy. You need to get healthy to lose weight. So I love that your book kind of is a blueprint for doing all those things and putting it all together. It's really well written. So good
Thank you
job
so
there.
much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're welcome. So this book, it's different from your other books though. So like you've written other books, like what did you feel was missing from those other books where you're like, this is the book that I need to write? Like, did you have an aha moment where you just knew that this was the book that you had to write and get out to the world?
Yeah, because the other books all have low carb keto components to it, but it wasn't a full book on it. And over the
Mhm.
last couple of years, and I'm sure you both have seen it, keto has exploded, low carb has exploded, and with that, there's
Yeah.
pros and cons. The pros is that people are understanding, they're hearing about it, they're applying it, they're reversing conditions, they're healing their body. But the cons is that so many people are teaching it and doing it the wrong way. There's clean keto, there's dirty keto, there's issues with long-term ketosis versus flexing in and out. So I wanted to write a book that took everything that I've learned and applied and put my students have gone through and I've gotten some research from into a easy to read book, which outlines my 4 pillars, which I teach to my students. And that was calling me for a couple of years. So it took me 2 years to complete the book. And I believe it's one of the better books there written on keto, because it not only focuses on keto, it focuses on this holistic health, like you mentioned. And there's also even a chapter in there on sleep, because sleep is so
Yeah.
important when it comes to health. And there's always going to be some self-development things sprinkled in there as well, because I can't help but talk about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on those 4 pillars, because I did want to ask you about that. Do you want to do like the little Reader's Digest version of what your 4 pillars are? Because those are like kind of your signature keto, your signature. Those are like your thing, and they're kind of different from what other people have. And I know that just talking about the 4 pillars is not a spoiler alert. So why
Yes.
don't you just touch on those a little bit for our listeners?
Yes. So the Reader's Digest version of the 4 pillars. The first pillar is called adapt, and that simply means getting your body fat adapted. Out of the 70 trillion cells in the body, we could only burn sugar or fat. Most people are burning sugar, which leads to a lot of issues, metabolic disorders, insulin resistance, diabetes, cancer, etc. So in that first pillar, I teach you how to go from being a sugar burner to a fat burner. We make that switch. It takes about 14 to 21 days. Then we transition into the second pillar called fast, where then we start implementing intermittent fasting with different schedules and strategies. Once we graduate from that, then we move into the phase pillar, which is the third pillar, which is actually phasing out all carbohydrates, essentially doing zero carbs and doing a carnivore approach. And there's 4 different levels that I teach that. Once we finish those 3 pillars, which takes about 60 to 90 days, then we move into the flex pillar. And by that point, you're now keto adapted, which is different than fat adapted. And now you have this metabolic flexibility to go in and out of ketosis, where it makes this tool, keto, much more sustainable. So those are the 4 pillars: adapt, fast, phase, and flex.
Yeah, and that flex is definitely where people want to go. And I know we're going to talk on this later. So when we talk about intermittent fasting, I have something I want to say there about that. But there is one thing in your book that I like that made me laugh, the George Costanza effect. And because one, I'm a Seinfeld fan and I love George Costanza. But I really like how you use this analogy or this comparison of George Costanza and how he is always seeking the wrong solutions to problems, and how you tie that into the advice we're given from doctors or from the medical establishment or even from the government when it comes to nutrition. And it's like, really, whatever they say to do, we should just do the opposite, because it really is the wrong advice, the wrong solutions to all of our problems. So I like that you point that out there.
Yeah, I'm a big Seinfeld fan as well. And I got that analogy from Dr. Jason Funk, so I got to credit him. But yeah,
Okay.
it's so true, because when we look at the American Diabetes Association website, right, the same diet that they're promoting is the same diet that could lead to diabetes. Doesn't make sense, all right? When we look at what's fed to cancer patients in the hospital going through chemo, that food contributes to cancer. When we think about cholesterol, right, more people are dying with normal, so they're dying with heart disease with normal to low cholesterol than high cholesterol. So when we look at all these government guidelines for nutrition and what the mainstream media is talking about, it's really the opposite, the George Costanza effect. What he did on that episode, he started to do everything opposite of what he had been doing. And he was happier, he was healthier, he had better relationships because he just did everything opposite. So we look at what the government promotes in mainstream media, and if we start to do the opposite, then we're going to go down the right direction, the George Costanza effect.
I love it. Yeah, it only makes sense if you don't think about it.
yeah, exactly.
All right. So, okay, another thing your book does is it does go through kind of dispelling a lot of common myths that are out there. Calories in, calories out, cholesterol, saturated fat, meaning bad, as you mentioned. The advice to eat small meals throughout the day, or that your body needs glucose. But you also have a chapter on fasting. And so, kind of in theme with the myths and the fasting, Leah has an article that just kind of ties in perfectly to those two things.
Yes, I do. So we're going to talk about fasting now, intermittent fasting, and just some myths you should stop believing is the title of the article. And it's definitely got 10 myths, I think, in there that we might go through a few of those and some of those common ones. But I was really interested to ask the first question, which was, in your 4-pillar phase, you like your clients to be fat adapted first before going into intermittent fasting. So I'd love for you to explain some reasoning behind that rather than just going straight into fasting.
Yeah, and you could go straight into fasting and still get results. However, if you want to maximize the results, I think getting fat adapted beforehand makes a big difference. And when we think about fasting, fasting is like a muscle. Same thing with our bicep muscle. When we go to the gym, we start to do curls and pull-ups. We start to have a scheduled structure to build the bicep muscle. We don't just go into that gym the first time and do a whole bunch of 150 curls because we're going to destroy ourselves. So with fasting, we want to build that muscle. And if we get fat adapted before, and that just takes 14 to 21 days, and then do fasting after that, now you're going to have more metabolic flexibility. So when you go and you skip breakfast or skip dinner, or just go essentially maybe 16 hours without food, you're in the fasted state. Your body now has this flexibility and this fasting muscle to actually switch from burning glucose to burning fat. And it's more efficient that way. Now, let's say you didn't do that and you were not fat adapted, you're a sugar burner, and then you just go and do a 16-hour fast tomorrow. It's going to look ugly and it's going to feel ugly.
It's going to hurt.
It's going to hurt. Yeah. Just like you wouldn't be a couch potato and run a marathon tomorrow, you would train for it. One thing that happens is if you're eating every 2 to 3 hours and you fast tomorrow, just because you heard about the benefits of fasting, well, the brain is so used to getting a hit of glucose every few hours. And now you go several hours without food, glucose is going to drop low in the brain. So the body wants to survive. That's the number one priority for the body, is survival. So the brain will send the body intense signals for food, for carbohydrate cravings, sugar cravings. It wants to fulfill its desire to get that glucose spike in the brain, because you didn't do the work to let your body burn fat and produce ketones. But when the ketones are coming, the brain calms down because the brain's getting the ketone fuel. So that's one of the biggest differences right there. So I do think it makes a big difference. And I'm curious to hear what you wrote in the article. Do you also agree with that approach?
Holly and I definitely agree with that approach. That's something that we advocate for our clients as well, because, you know, especially if people coming from a standard Australian or American diet and they're eating regularly every few hours and they're sugar burning and all those kind of things, they go straight into fasting. They have all the cravings. They can't last a few hours. They try and push themselves through. They feel worse for doing it. And then they blame it on the fasting. Well, fasting doesn't work for me. And it's not, it's not that fasting hasn't worked. It's just that their body isn't prepared for it. So preparing the body ahead of time, I think, is a fantastic approach. And I think any of our listeners that have tried fasting and haven't been able to get into that state, this is definitely a great approach to take for them, for sure.
Agreed.
Yeah. Holly, did you want to say something there?
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, the same thing. And that's actually what I wanted to talk about, because I have people ask, because fasting is everywhere. So people are always asking, whether they're clients or family members or friends, it's like, hey, I'm going to try fasting. What do you recommend that? And for my first question is always, well, are you eating low carb or some version of keto or something? And usually the answer is no. So my advice to start is to always start with 3 meals a day and start lowering your carb contents. Because most people do just graze all day, snack all day, or eat those 6 small meals a day. It's like, let's just start with doing 2 or 3 solid meals a day and then go from there, because your family's going to hate you. You're going to hate it. Like we said, it's a mental game, and you're going to have to white knuckle through it if you just try to jump right in. And like Leah said, yeah, they're going to be like, yeah, fasting doesn't work. I tried that one time.
Exactly. And they blame the fasting, or they blame the keto. It could be keto too, but it's really the structure that was flawed. So when you go into it fat adapted, now you've built up this muscle, and then you get much more benefits from the fasting window versus going into it as a sugar burner.
Yeah, definitely. And I think so many people have dysregulated blood sugar levels these days. So even just the benefit of bringing those blood sugar into balance by eating 3 regular meals just to start with, even way back, depending on how bad their blood sugar is, can really be helpful before even taking a very low carb approach or a keto approach. I mean, that can happen really quickly for people, but people who have such dysregulated blood sugar, just getting them to eat 3 regular meals can be so helpful, rather than their blood sugars, going crazy everywhere. So there's so many different approaches, which it's really bio-individual for many people, isn't it? And I love there's so many different approaches to fasting. And the article kind of mentions that one of the myths is all intermittent fasting is the same. Could you explain some of the different methods of intermittent fasting? And do you have a preference for any, or do you just let the person kind of decide what they think is best for them?
Yeah, great question. There's several ways to practice intermittent fasting, just like there's several ways to practice keto. My preference, I think most people do well with 16 to 18 hours of fasting, and then like a 6 to 8 hour eating window. And ideally we want to eat keto, low carb when we are eating. With that being said, I believe it's a good idea to always mix things up. I don't think we should do the same fasting schedule every single day. It's always a good idea to mix things up, throw in a 24-hour fast, a 32-hour fast. Maybe you have a day where you don't practice fasting and you go back to 3 meals and have that breakfast. It's the variation and the change that creates adaptation in the body. And whenever you create adaptation, the good cells get stronger, the good mitochondria get stronger, and the bad cells, the bad mitochondria, they don't adapt well. So the body will get rid of that. So with different variations of fasting, a lot of people are already fasting when they're sleeping. Typically, most people are not waking up in the middle of the night and eating. Some people are, but if you're not eating in the middle of the night, you're already fasting 7, 8 hours. Now, if we could push that to 10 hours and then build up to 12 hours and then eventually get a steady 16, 18-hour daily fast, I think that's a good number to hit. And then you could start adding the variations after that.
Yeah, definitely. And then I feel like also too, it's the variability is great for the flexibility, like you were mentioning there, and also building up to some of the longer fasts as well. Like you don't want to go into a 24-hour fast on your first fast. I mean, like starting with something that's way more manageable, I think is a great starting point there. And even if it is just like starting with, okay, I woke up and I didn't feel like eating breakfast today because I'm starting to feel the benefits of fat burning. And then I'm going to eat lunch and dinner, and I might sit on that for a few weeks. There's no rule that says you've got to go straight into 1 meal a day, or or you have to go 24 hours or 36 hours, or whatever it is. There's no rule that says you must do that. It's really like listening to your body, I think, in these ways of becoming fat adapted and being flexible, I think is what the key to longevity with it all. Correct. Rather than just hitting it hard. And that's just like saying this is just another diet, right? Isn't it? When you're just going in there and saying, oh, I've got 3 weeks to lose this amount of weight and I'm going to use fasting as my method.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the wrong mindset. It's the wrong mindset. Yeah. Listen to your body. I always say there's no such thing as a failed fast. So if somebody aims to go 24 hours, but they stop at 16 hours, fantastic. You still got 16 hours of benefits. Your body was still doing amazing things. Then let's go to 17 hours the next time and build from there. And everybody's going to be different. Of course, it's also going to be different for women versus men. I talk about that in the book, especially cycling women versus postmenopausal women. There's so many variables. And like you said, listen to your body, see what works for you. You could also test your glucose and ketones to see what it's doing during the fast. So there's ways to kind of gauge that as well.
Yeah, that's great. And it is so different between different people, especially like, my husband, he loves fasting. He'll just go straight into it, does really well, loves it. And then other times I know, depending on where I'm cycling or depending on the amount of stress in my life, it's kind of like, I'm just going to leave it this week. I'm listening to my body and I'm honoring that. And then maybe next month or next week, I'm going to get back into it again and just taking my time with doing it. And I think that's, allowing everybody to have that grace. It's not a set fast rules that you should be following. Definitely. And yeah, and then there's some other myths here that we might be able to just kind of like churn through. So what about your thoughts on just eating whatever you like during the eating window?
Well, that's where a lot of studies that show fasting doesn't work for weight loss. And you go look at the studies and that's exactly what they did. They ate whatever they wanted during the window. So how you break the fast and what you eat during your eating window is just as important as the fast itself. You could undo all of the benefits if you're eating the wrong food, if you're eating a high processed, high sugar, vegetable oils during the eating window. So it's important to eat the right food, especially how you break the fast. You don't want to break a fast with carbohydrates. You want to break a fast with protein and fat. If you break a fast with carbohydrates, especially processed carbs, you're going to see a super high glycemic response. Glucose is going to shoot up more than if you were eating 3 meals a day. So we don't want that. So we want to have insulin-friendly foods during the eating window, AKA low carb, AKA keto, whatever you want to call it. That'll maximize your benefits. The cool thing about low carb and fasting, how they are a match made in heaven, is because they both do a good job at keeping insulin low. And then when we think about fat storage, when we think about cancer growth and insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, it is insulin at the driving force there. And insulin is not the bad guy. It's a survival mechanism. We wouldn't exist today if we didn't have insulin. But when we call insulin all the time, insulin is the bully on the block. He's going to downregulate your fat burning hormones. He's going to put you in a fat storage state. So when you have carbs and you're eating like crap during the eating window, although you had low insulin during the fast, now you ramp it back up and then you negate a lot of those benefits. So it's important to eat insulin-friendly foods during the window.
Definitely. And also one of the other myths here was like, it says fasting makes you overindulge. And I think these things kind of are very similar to one another. Have you seen any reasons why people want to overindulge during their eating window? Do you think it's because they've prolonged the fast too long, or do you think it's more of a mindset kind of issue happening here?
I think it's both. I think number one, if they don't get fat adapted beforehand, they're probably going to overeat and overindulge. So we talked about that, get fat adapted first. And then a lot of people, the mindset part is that a lot of people will use fasting as a punishment because they ate a bad meal or they partied, speaking of alcohol, they had a whole bunch of alcohol and they'll use, all right, I'm going to fast 24 hours to kind of negate what I did, which is okay to do a fast after something like that. But if you're looking at it with that mindset, then you're just going to keep overindulging and it's going to be this vicious cycle. So those are a couple things there, but it's not common for people who are fat adapted, who understand fasting. It's not common for them to overindulge, especially when they break their fast with protein, because protein it's going to activate different processes in the body versus fat and carbs that are going to help you feel full and satiated. It activates cholecystokinin, leptin, peptide YY. So it helps you feel full. So it prevents that overindulgence. It's almost impossible to overindulge on animal-based protein. Think about the last time you went to a restaurant, maybe you got like a 16-ounce steak, pretty substantial. You were probably stuffed. And if somebody brought another piece of steak, you're like, no, there's no way I could eat that. But bring a dessert cart or a soda, you could have that automatically. And you're wondering, well, how's there space for that carbs, but not the protein? Well, the carbs don't activate those satiety hormones. So as long as you break it with protein, it's going to prevent that overindulgence.
What's your favorite meal to break a fast?
Ideally, it would be bone broth. I don't always do bone broth, but I like bone broth to break a fast, or like a ribeye steak with some eggs. Those are my go-to.
Yeah, delicious. It's breakfast time here. I'm already like, bone broth.
It could be a good breakfast.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the other ones I wanted to talk about too is, and it kind of fits in with that as well. It's almost like what you were just kind of saying, and it was around people using it for weight loss, and they're using it as a calorie deficient. So what are your thoughts around that and fasting?
Intermittent fasting is not about eating less. It's about eating less often. So it's not about cutting calories. I like to stay away from the calorie conversation. I'm not a calorie denier. I do think calories matter, but I don't think they're important. I actually, right before this podcast, I interviewed a gentleman named Dr. Don Klum, and we talked about calories in versus calories out as the primary conversation. And he said there's about a 20 to 25% variable when tracking calories, meaning somebody could be tracking every calorie, weighing every single food, putting it in their calorie calculator, and thinking they're getting 1,500 calories a day, but there could be 25% difference, meaning it could be so much more. He also shared that people who are happier burn more calories than people who are depressed. He also shared that people who have different gut bacteria burn more calories than those who don't have that gut bacteria. So it's just a huge distraction to focus on the calories in versus calories out. But then you're going to get the argument, but the only way fasting works for weight loss is because you cut your calories. Here's the biggest difference between, let's say you do eat less and eat less often, meaning you cut your calories with fasting. Let's talk about that versus cutting your calories and eating small portion control meals throughout the day. There's a big difference. And the big difference is what's called counter-regulatory hormones. When you're in a fasted state, you're going to keep insulin low. These hormones run counter to insulin. Cortisol, glucagon, human growth hormone, and a few others, they are what's called your sympathetic tone. They are going up in the fasted state. What that does, it preserves your metabolism from shutting down. It actually could increase your metabolic rate. And it's your body's way of literally pumping itself full of energy because it thinks you're in a famish and it wants to energize you to go hunt and kill. So you're getting this benefit of counter-regulatory hormones during a fast, even if you're cutting calories when you are eating. Let's say you're not fasting, but you're cutting calories and eating every 2 to 3 hours, those small portion control meals. You don't get the benefit of counter-regulatory hormones. Then your metabolism actually slows down to match the lower caloric intake. That's a problem, especially if you do it long term. So the biggest difference between cutting your calories with fasting versus cutting your calories with small portion controlled meals is the counter-regulatory hormones. The fitness people don't understand that. And I get a lot of backlash when I talk about getting away from the calorie talk, but that's the truth. What really matters is not the calories. What matters is your hormones, the receptor sites that are integrated to those hormones, and how they actually are communicating with the receptor sites, hormones, communication. That's what matters. Cell metabolism and hormones matter.
That's such a great explanation. Thank you. And also that podcast sounds really interesting. So we'll link it up on our show notes for our listeners as well, because I'm sure they'll want to jump across and listen to that. And then I just have one last myth I want to bust. And I didn't actually know that this was one until I read it. And it said you are supposed to restrict your water intake too during the fasting window. And I was like, I could never restrict water as well. So it's almost like people are talking about dry fasting here. So have you heard much around that? Or do you think, obviously we know water is so important. So you recommend drinking water during fasting?
I do recommend drinking water during fasting. However, a lot of people are actually overly hydrating. I used to say for years, drink half your body weight in ounces, and that's how you know how much water you should drink. But I don't believe in that anymore. I say now instead, drink when you're thirsty and just make sure that your urine is mostly clear. If you're hitting that, you're good. So in the fasted state, for most people, they need to be intentional with getting water and electrolytes. It'll help them feel better during the fast. But there's also a benefit to not having water during a fast, like a dry fast. That's more extreme, but you will get more benefits because it forces a bigger stressor. It forces more of this hormesis, which is a stress applied to the body, which yields you a positive benefit, but it's more extreme. So that's probably more for somebody who's an experienced faster and they're looking for more autophagy, more fat loss. Your body will achieve that with the dry fast, but just keep in mind it's more extreme, more for the advanced fasters out there. So you're not, if somebody says you're not supposed to drink water during a fast, I call nonsense on that. You should, most people should drink water during a fast.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess if you've done a dry fast, afterwards you need to hydrate adequately. Otherwise you stay kind of, I guess, do you stay dehydrated for that time? And I don't mean like you just mentioned, just topping up those water levels, those electrolyte levels that you might have depleted.
Some people do need to do it slowly, go ease into drinking water because their stomach has just been off for whatever time you did the dry fast for. But some people are actually pretty well hydrated to the point where they could go and do like a 20-hour dry fast and still actually have mostly clear urine. So a lot of people store excess water weight, and that's what it's there for. The body will store water as well in fat cells. So during a dry fast, the body will crush fat cells and you'll get hydrated that way. And if you're taking a shower or washing your hands, you also get hydrated that way because your body actually absorbs that water. So for some people, they might have to be really intentional with getting their water back in. For others, they could go low and slow.
That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I know, Holly, you had a question around fasting you wanted to ask Ben.
Oh, you guys covered it. You moved on, you covered it. I'm good.
Thank you.
All right.
Pretty good.
Well, I'm going to throw over to you for the next article, which we're going to start talking a little bit about inflammation.
Okay, yeah, and you already kind of touched on inflammation a little bit. You mentioned inflammation as being a kind of a root for disease. And this article is called These Seemingly Healthy Foods Are the Source of Brain Fog. And really, brain fog is also another source of inflammation. It's just inflammation in the gut. I hear people all the time complaining about brain fog, and it doesn't matter what walk of life you're from, or even sometimes really not. It really doesn't matter if you're eating an unhealthy diet or a healthy diet. Many people complain of these symptoms of just feeling spacey, having low energy, maybe slow thinking. And so it can be confusing as to what is causing these symptoms of brain fog. So this article is interesting because it talks about how sometimes these healthy foods could be the source of it. And it lists 6 things: probiotic foods and drinks, grains and legumes, which we know in this space that definitely is a source of inflammation and brain fog. Gluten. It talks about low carb and keto alternatives. So I want to circle back on that: protein powder and raw leafy green vegetables. Do you want to touch on, well, did any of these stick out to you, first of all?
Yeah, well, the probiotics is important because a lot of people overdo it with probiotics. If you take the same probiotic over and over and over for weeks and months, you could actually decrease gut diversity and create monoculturing, which could lead to brain fog. So that's cool that they mentioned that. Of course, we know the grains and legumes. So they mentioned that keto alternatives such as green leafy vegetables and protein powders is also a cause.
Yes.
Yeah, I could see that with some people who have leaky gut and they're eating green leafy vegetables. Look, green leafy vegetables are great, but if you have leaky gut, they do have anti-nutrients in them, and it could actually contribute to more gut dysbiosis, especially if it's raw. So for example, spinach, very high in oxalates, kale, very high in oxalates. And these are anti-nutrients that actually could lead to the poking of the lining of your gut, which could lead to brain fog. And then for protein powders, did they say specifically which type of protein powder, or just like keto protein powders in general?
It just said that because protein powders can have a lot of additives, or they can have dairy and they can have gluten and stuff. So I think it's more of the other ingredients within the protein powders.
Yeah, dairy could be one for sure. I'm a big fan of limiting your dairy or removing it at least for 30 days and switching over to like a sheep dairy or a goat dairy. Those are much more tolerable. And the
Yeah.
artificial sweeteners, we know Splenda, aspartame, sucralose, those could also create gut dysbiosis as well. So I do see the link there. Yeah.
Yeah, the funny thing, like reading this article, I felt like this was just not a very beginner article, and probably one of those articles that contributes to the confusion that is
Mhm.
out there with nutrition. And so I'm reading it thinking, this isn't helpful for anybody
Yeah.
right now. So that was my big takeaway from the article, is this is not like a beginning go-to. Why do I have brain fog? It's like, why don't you just start first by just focusing on eating whole foods, drinking water, avoiding processed foods and those rancid fats and oils, and start there and see if that helps your brain fog. Don't be taking away your spinach and kale just yet.
Agreed. I agree. Yeah. If you're a beginner, just do all the other things you mentioned first. And if you've hit a plateau and you still don't feel right and you feel like you're doing everything right, then you could look at some of those things mentioned in the article.
Yeah, I can just see someone like driving through Chick-fil-A and saying, well, I can eat this, but I'm going to stop taking my probiotics.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's really all I had to say there.
Yeah, that's the problem that we have in this day and age. Before it used to be not enough information. Now it's just too much information, and it could confuse a lot of people.
Yep, we are all on a high fact diet.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, well, I know that you also talk about carnivore within your book, as you mentioned in your, was that phase 4 or phase 3?
Yeah.
Phase 3. Yeah. So I really want to talk about this next article on the carnivore. So I'm going to toss it back to Leah on this one.
Thanks. So yeah, well, I guess, another thing that people say is a source of inflammation is eating too much meat, right? So that's another one that I was surprised wasn't on that list of things that they had there.
Oh,
but
yeah.
yeah, which and we see so often, and this article is one of those typical ones, which is basically like you're omitting an entire food group, so it's got to be bad for you. And we see so many of these articles, especially like because Holly and I are reviewing articles all the time, and it's always like, don't remove an entire food group, it's really bad for you. So anyway, with this one, it's just asking the question, can you have too much meat? So what are your thoughts on that, Ben?
Well, when we talk about meat, they're not all created equal, first of all. So there's a big difference between corn-fed meat, and grass-fed and finished meat. So the animals were treated differently. They have a different nutritional profile. There's antibiotics versus no antibiotics. So you can't just say that, first of all. So are we talking about quality meat? Are we talking about toxic meat? If it's toxic meat, yeah, you don't want to have that. That's not a good idea. But if it's quality meat, I mean, the only issue I see with having quality meat is if you're eating it every 2 to 3 hours and getting too much mTOR and not enough autophagy. Other than that, it's going to be beneficial. There's no anti-nutrients. I mean, beef, grass-fed beef, it's very rare to have a sensitivity to it. It's so nutritionally rich. So I think the article is more propaganda than anything else.
Yeah, that's right. We should have looked at who wrote it, and we might have found it linked back to a vegan or or a plug for grains or something like that. And earlier you mentioned too, when we were talking about eating meat, that like eating steak, that it's hard to overeat steak as well. So it leaves you more satiated. So I think that's a really good reason. I was just also wondering, in your phase, so you said it was phase 3, is there a reason you move into more carnivore style at that phase? Or because like I'm a pretty big advocate for veggies. I love my veggies with my protein and fats. So why are we taking veggies out at that stage?
I put it in there because over the years I started to hear a lot about carnivore. I've interviewed a few people. I've heard a lot of anecdotal evidence. And then I did it myself. And I did a whole experiment last year where I did a whole bunch of lab work, did 40 strict days of carnivore, did the lab work again, and it transformed my health. And then I started to apply it to some of my students, and it transformed their health. So I realized that actually most people probably have leaky gut. And even though these vegetables are great, I love vegetables too. If you have leaky gut and you're eating those vegetables every single day, it could actually make leaky gut worse because of these anti-nutrients. There's phytates, there's lectins, there's oxalates, and many, many others. So by just going 30 days and removing them, allowing your gut to heal and repair itself. So carnivore and fasting are two great ways to heal the gut. Then you can introduce them back in. I'm not of the group that says carnivore all the time, for years or for months and months and months. I think it's a short-term thing to just heal the gut. And then you start reintroducing the vegetables and the fruit back in and see how your body responds. It's like an elimination diet, essentially. So I do it for that aspect, the gut repair aspect.
Oh, I love that idea. It's like a therapeutic diet rather than just treating it as a long-term one, just for specific purpose. And then if you're someone that loves your veggies, you can add them back in. But another thing, many low carb and keto people just tend to eat the same veggies all the time as well. So like, they're just always eating cauliflower because cauliflower everything. And I think a lot of people go through that phase, but obviously again, like just eating a variety of vegetables are going to be much better than eating the same vegetable over and over, especially if you're having a reaction to it.
Yeah, that goes for all foods, not just vegetables, but mixing it up. If we eat the same foods every single day, which a lot of people do, the body will create a sensitivity to it. We're not designed to eat the same foods every single day. We're designed to actually vary the foods up. So switch the set of vegetables you're having with a different set of vegetables. Switch to your low carb foods with different low carb foods. That creates more diversity in the gut. And we know from studies that the more diverse your gut, the healthier you are. And changing your foods and rotating different sources is how you create that diversity.
Love that. Well, Holly and I are like huge advocates for beets, and people always take beets out of a low carb diet because it is tend to be higher in kind of carbohydrates or sugars they see it as. But even just a small amount has such a good benefit to help you digest fats. And so I often see people eliminating these vegetables that actually can help you with your digestion or with whatever it is you're eating, or maybe a lack of micronutrients that you need in the body. And they're eliminating them because they may be too perceived as not a low carb or keto vegetable. But you don't need to eat the whole vegetable, right? I'm not going to sit down and eat a whole beet.
Yeah, you're right. It'll help you break down the fat because what did you say? You are?
That's what I am. I will eat a whole beet.
And if you're really metabolically flexible and active, you can still, stay in ketosis to get right back in, which is fine, right? But yeah, beets will help the liver break down the fat by producing bile. So yeah, it's really the context of how much are you having. Some berries are fine on keto, some fruit are fine on keto, but if you have too much, then it could be a problem. Yeah,
definitely. Holly, do you have any carnivore questions you'd like to ask Ben?
I do. So I know we talked about meat quality. Sometimes you have to meet people where they are, in my opinion. And if I have someone coming to me saying, hey, I want to try carnivore, but there's always that. I can't afford to be buying grass-fed beef and chicken or whatever, all these grass-fed proteins for 2 or 3 meals a day for 30 days. Like at that point, do you ever say that, hey, it's okay, just get what you can afford? Because maybe if you're just eating the proteins and not all the other stuff, there's still going to be some benefit there. Yes.
Yeah, I say do the best you can with your resources. I agree. And then if you add fasting, you're going to save money with fasting, and you'd use that money saved to buy a healthier animal product. So just do the best you can with your resources.
Yeah, I like that. You already talked about it, but I really like how you said to use the carnivore as a therapeutic type of diet. And sometimes, once you're doing keto or low carb for a while, you can really start listening to your body. I know I've gone through phases where I don't want vegetables. I don't want to always have a salad. Sometimes I just want to have meat, or I just want to have a big steak. But I feel like we're raised in being told, oh, well, you have to have something with it. And so we get stuck in these social norms of, well, no, I have to have something else. I can't just have a steak. And so I think it's important to be able to listen to your body and not have to feel like you're being judged.
Well said. I agree.
All right.
Well, this has been a really great conversation. I feel like we've just busted a whole lot of myths here, and you've given us some really great wisdom. Is there anything that you'd like to share with our listeners? I know you've got a book tour coming up. Maybe you'd like to share some of those dates.
Yeah, this has been fun for sure, by the way. Thank you for the invite. If you want to get the book, you could get it over at ketoflexbook.com. It has been endorsed by Dr. Jason Fung and Dr. Mindy Peltz, Thomas DeLauer, a few other incredible leaders in our space. And it's available on Audible and on Kindle right now. And I'm in the process of recording it's available on paperback and Kindle, excuse me. I'm in the process of recording the Audible. And then I'll be speaking at a few events, keto low carb events, Keto Palooza in San Diego in August, a keto summit in Orlando in August, Keto Symposium, September, Keto Las Vegas Keto in October, and then the Biohacking Congress in Miami in October. So yes, I would love to see your audience. If they're in that area, I'd love to see you in person and hang out there.
That sounds amazing. And coming back, getting all the festivals back in, it's like such a great way to connect with people that are like-minded and share inspiration and get you motivated again. I love being able to, unfortunately, I think it's going to be a while before I can travel over to the US again for conferences, but
I'm trying to get Leah to come out for the Las Vegas event. It's like, come on,
let's get her here. Come on.
Got to get here. Got to open up that world so I can get there. Oh, this has been so great talking to you. We'll link up on the show notes all your details so our listeners can follow you. You've got a great podcast that they can go and listen to as well. And just thank you for spending your time talking with us today. Yeah,
thank you, Leah and Holly. It was a pleasure. Love what you're doing. And I look forward to more conversations and collaborations with you too.
Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Well, that's the end of today's episode. Our theme music is created by Andrew Bowden and production services are by Kevin Kennedy Spain of Disc of Light Media. Have a great week, everyone.
Have a great week.